This podcast is brought to you by VinZero. VinZero pioneers solutions and services to the AEC and manufacturing industries to support net zero targets. Visit vinzero.com to learn more about how organisations design, build and solve through digitalisation. From VinZero to you, welcome to our Think Future podcast series. Each week we'll share conversations with industry leaders from around the world to find out how they're thinking future. Subscribe to VinZero Think Future for access to more episodes, interviews and profiles. Today we're joined by Ryan Colker. Ryan is the Vice President for Innovation for the ICC, International Codes Council, and Executive Director for ANCR, the Alliance for National and Community Resilience, a national coalition working to provide communities with the tools necessary to holistically assess and improve their resilience as we face climate change. Ryan, great to have you on the show. Tell us a little more about your background and journey to the ANCR and ICC.
Yeah, thanks so much, and really appreciate the opportunity to be here. I think, like most folks, there's some inspiration in their childhood that really sort of drives them into the future. And sort of my inspiration was a seventh grade science teacher who really sort of unlocked the interest and the curiosity in the natural environment and just really sort of understanding the world around you and around me. So sort of with that, led to a focus on environmental policy, and then really sort of looking interdisciplinarily across sort of how various different systems work. And so, through both the International Code Council and the Alliance for National and Community Resilience, we're really looking at holistic opportunities to drive progress in the world around us. So, for Anchor, it's about identifying, the various different aspects of communities and really what creates great places every day, but also influences their resilience. And really, it boils down to, the variety of different systems, whether that's social, organizational, infrastructural systems, and sort of how they all come together. And then from, sort of the International Code Council and the sort of role of buildings in making lives better. Again, it's all about sort of bringing systems together, understanding sort of their intersection with the broader sort of community, but also within the buildings themselves. So thinking about sort of the building enclosure, HVAC system, life safety systems, and sort of how all of them come together to really support the occupants and sort of the business needs that those buildings provide.
And there's a lot of conversation, a lot of different views on climate change and climate mitigation. I read recently John Holdren, former president of the American Association for Advancement of Science. He's also an energy and climate expert. He says dealing with climate change will be a combination of mitigation, adaptation and suffering. It's a question of how much we will experience of each, and that will be dependent on how seriously we approach mitigation in the first instance. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think those are certainly the three core areas. For a long time, we've focused a lot on the climate mitigation side of, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And I think that's, certainly something that needs to continue. But I think there's also now a recognition that, climate change is here. There are things that are already happening due to the changes in climate. And so, adaptation is certainly important. And we need to think about strategies, to address those changes. The suffering side, I think there's certainly potential for, sort of suffering. I think the unfortunate thing, or maybe even the reality, unfortunately, is that the suffering will tend to fall on the folks that are least able to bear it, sort of our vulnerable populations. And so, as we think about climate solutions, it's really essential that we assure that suffering is as limited as much as possible. And so, thinking through our strategies and sort of what impact that has on vulnerable populations who, often don't have the resources or the voice to engage in the higher level discussions that are really driving sort of the adaptation or mitigation strategies. So I think that's certainly something to keep in mind there.
Definitely, there was a lot of conversation around that in the IPCC sixth assessment report that's recently been released. And they're also very much urging all companies without delay to reduce their direct and indirect emissions. How are you seeing that reflected at a corporate level in the businesses and organisations you're working with?
Yeah, so certainly we see a lot of sort of pledges to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by name your year 2030, 2050. There's been within the buildings industry for a while now actually some commitments to support construction of high performance buildings. So I think we're really starting to see some of the strategies sort of starting to take place within companies. We're also seeing some sort of drivers from the financial markets and governments themselves. So we're seeing sort of this growth of stock funds with a focus on you know uh, reducing the investments in fossil fuel companies, for instance. We're also seeing from a government level here in the U.S., the Securities and Exchange Commission, which is sort of the regulator of publicly traded companies, so companies that are on the stock exchange, and sort of what their disclosure requirements are. And so the SEC is actually now talking about issuing a rule requiring publicly traded companies to sort of report on what their climate impacts are. And so I think that will drive additional focus on these issues, bring it into sort of corporate boardrooms, and really help move the discussion forward. So I think we're starting to see a lot of that. I was at COP26 in the We Mean Business Pavilion, which has sort of many of the companies that are interested in these issues, and they've made commitments towards advancing achievement of these goals. And so I think the next steps is really sort of holding these companies to those strategies and making sure that they're actually achieving what they've set out to achieve.
A recent McKinsey report, Solving the Net Zero Equation, claims there are 9 requirements to achieving net zero, the first being technology, innovation, and deployment. How market ready are the technologies needed to get to net zero in your view?
I think we already know sort of what the technologies are that are really going to help us advance forward. Thinking of things like energy storage systems, batteries, that will support the advancement towards zero energy buildings, electrification of vehicles, even in the industrial sector. I think there are strategies around energy efficiency. Folks talk about carbon capture and sequestration. I think that's certainly an important part, but I think it's not going to be the sort of silver bullet to sort of get us out of this. So I think there's going to be a whole lot of sort of various different technologies that are really going to drive us to achieving our goals.
Are there other priorities in your view that are also as important as technology?
Yeah, I mean, folks like to sort of point to technology as a solution, and it's certainly sort of a part. But I think the major sort of challenge or major area that we really need to focus on is the policy side. I think it's pretty easy to say technology is going to get us out of this, but without the sort of policies in place to really encourage folks to adopt it, to use it, um, to address some of those challenges that I mentioned relative to vulnerable populations. I think having sort of the real policy in place, the social change necessary, I think is really going to be a big challenge, but really where we need to focus a lot of attention.
So, from a technology perspective, obviously there's gaps in policy still to be identified, but how about technology? Are you seeing any gaps still needing to be addressed?
I think there's always opportunities to improve technology. I mentioned energy storage. I think that's one where we will see, an increase in, sort of efficiency of, that storage and the release of the energy that it's storing. I think there's some real opportunities to look at sort of the materials necessary for, those energy storage systems. A lot of those are, rare earth materials that only are available in certain locations. And so identifying sort of strategies to have sort of different battery or storage technologies that use less of those materials. I think there's also some opportunities to think about the various different materials that we used within the building space. So we rely a lot on concrete and steel, which do have potentially sort of large greenhouse gas emission associated with them. So I think we're seeing sort of a lot of interest in reducing the carbon impacts of those materials. So I think that's certainly another area where technology can be useful. Either reducing the impacts of those specific materials, or finding alternative materials that perform similarly and can sort of provide that function. So I think there are, certainly some gaps, but there are some great folks that are working on those issues.
What are the critical elements to successfully deploying technologies that can support net zero from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think it's really a combination of a variety of different things. So certainly looking at in the building sector the opportunity to create the most efficient buildings possible, and then offsetting whatever energy that you can't sort of reduce with renewables. And so also energy storage comes into that as well, sort of thinking about when renewable energy is generated. It's not as predictable as just sort of plugging into the grid with sort of the existing power plants. And so being able to leverage, technologies like energy storage, uh, advancing some of the communications between buildings and grids, of really understanding sort of when energy is best used, whether that's due to pricing or available of renewables. So I think it's really sort of around the integration of a wide variety of different technologies and solutions. We're even seeing some increased use of sort of natural solutions. So sort of thinking about natural ventilation, placement of trees, a wide variety of different things that really need to come together to really address the performance of buildings.
Are you looking for a digitalisation and net zero partner to help you achieve your goals? Join the thousands of AEC and manufacturing customers globally who have turned to VinZero to start their journey toward a net zero future. With 32 offices around the world, VinZero can connect you to the right technologies and workflow processes so you can maintain your competitive position and increase profitability. VinZero has an industry expert to help you navigate the best pathway forward wherever you are on your digitalisation and net zero journey. Visit vinzero.com to find out more. For companies that are yet to formalise their own net zero policies, where is the best place to start?
Yeah, so I think there's certainly a few things that folks could do. I mean, certainly take a look at sort of other companies within your sector, see what they're doing. Um, Also, sort of just get up to speed on sort of what the opportunities are. I think one of the first things that a company should really do is sort of assess where they are currently. What are the sort of business practices or sort of key components of the company that really impact greenhouse gas emissions. So, thinking about transportation, thinking about buildings, thinking about the supply chain. What are the companies that you rely on doing in this space, and how can they contribute to your goals? And then again, sort of looking up on whose supply chain are you in, and really understanding sort of what their goals are. So I think first is really sort of understanding the landscape, and then second is really understanding sort of your individual company or business practices and sort of what their contributions are. I think one of the sort of key phrases that a lot of folks use is you can't manage what you don't measure. And so sort of having that measurement in place and really understanding sort of where you're starting from, I think is really a key first step.
And I think you shared with me earlier that you've seen some creativity come to play with organisations looking at how they cluster people together.
Yeah, so I mean, if you think about sort of improving energy efficiency in buildings and making the most effective use of air conditioning or heat, we've seen some companies actually survey their employees and figure out sort of what is their ideal temperature level. And so thinking about sort of how we use HVAC, if we can sort of cluster folks who have sort of similar needs together, we don't get the challenge of, my office is too hot, my office is too cold. We, may overheat or overcool, but really finding sort of that ideal, temperature for occupants and being able to sort of plan accordingly. So it's interesting strategies like that, being creative, sort of thinking about both the people, but also sort of the opportunities that those sorts of strategies provide to enhance energy efficiency.
So, what are some of the other interesting innovations you're seeing now in the sustainability space in terms of ads built?
Yeah, so thinking about sort of at the building level, there's some really great examples of zero energy buildings. So buildings that produce as much energy on site as they use. And so one really great example is the Bullitt Center in Seattle. So it's a office building where they've taken the strategies around zero energy buildings seriously. So certainly a large solar array on the roof, but then also really engaging occupants in sort of their responsibilities and roles in helping the building achieve its zero energy building goals. So things like operable windows, so you can get sort of that natural ventilation when when the outdoor environment sort of suits that. And I think one of the really cool things is, sort of the building actually signals the occupants of, now's a good time to open the windows or now's a good time to close the windows. Those sorts of things. Taking advantage of natural ventilation, as I mentioned. But they also have done some really neat things relative to water use within the building, so compostable toilets. I think they also have a system that actually takes heat off of sewer pipes and sort of brings that as a heating element to the building. So really exciting things like that, and it really presents sort of the opportunity that we do have, at an individual building scale to really reduce the impacts. I think moving up from sort of the building scale, the real opportunities at the community level as well. You've seen this concept of the 15-minute city sort of come up, and it's really about thinking through, what are the core elements, of a community. Sort of what allows folks to uh, sort of be part of that community and assure that they have sort of all of the resources they need. And so thinking about, sort of within 15 minutes, how can someone get to, the supermarket, schools, jobs, doctor's office, and that really supports both efficiency, at the building level, but also thinking about things like transportation. If you don't need to go sort of long distances, you can think about sort of various different modes of transportation. Um, whether that's scooters and bicycles up to sort of electric buses and those sorts of things. And so it really helps support the efficiency of the community at large. But it also helps enhance some of the social resilience of the community as well. And so, if you think about sort of a 15-minute radius, and sort of your neighbors are all sort of part of that community, it really builds sort of social cohesion as well, which I think is some of the things that we're maybe losing in some of our urban environments. So I think it really provides an opportunity to think both on the social and environmental side of these sorts of issues.
Do you think we'll start to see more examples of adaptive reuse for existing buildings that have reached end of life as well?
Yeah, I think we may focus a lot on sort of new construction as an opportunity to address the climate challenges, but I think recognizing that the vast majority of the buildings that we have today into the future already exist. So, in the U.S. and I think pretty much in many developed countries, only about 1 to 2% of the building stock is new every year. And so, if we're thinking about sort of our climate goals, we need to address existing buildings. And so, thinking about how to sort of best either retrofit or repurpose those existing buildings to really take advantage of the energy, the materials that are already there. I think is a huge example. So we're certainly seeing a lot of interest in transitioning warehouse space into loft apartments, for instance, or tech campuses. And I think it really provides, a neat character, to the space. It's not sort of your cookie cutter or average, type of space. And so there's, some nuances and some real, sort of character. So I think it provides, a great opportunity, to sort of reuse the buildings and materials, that we've already put in place.
Well, we know that climate has already started to change. We're already feeling the impacts and seeing more extreme weather events around the world. You speak about the importance of climate adaptation in many of your talks. So, what does it mean for the building industry as a whole?
Yeah, so as I mentioned at the beginning, I think there are opportunities and needs for both adaptation and mitigation strategies, and the buildings industry, the built environment is really key to that. We rely on buildings and infrastructure to protect us from hazards, and I think climate change certainly maybe changes the dynamic of what those hazards are. So I think we all recognize that the climate is changing and it's going to deliver hazard events in places we may not have expected them previously, or more extreme or more frequent. And so really assuring that the built environment sort of goes along as those different hazards occur. So if we're building a building today and expect it to last 50 to 100 years, what are the hazards that building is going to face over those 50 or 100 years? And so sort of recognizing that we're going to see changes, or may not be certain on sort of what those specific changes are going to be at a specific location. And so that does present some challenges for the buildings industry. But ICC is working with a few different codes and standards development organizations in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand to look at sort of what are the approaches to build in that adaptability. So looking at things like building codes, which is sort of the basis for understanding or providing those minimum criteria. How do we assure that they continue to adapt to address that changing climate? And so you're sort of thinking through the different strategies of how do we use climate data today to address those issues, and how can we effectively use climate data into the future? And so ultimately, sort of that effort will lead to a global resiliency guideline, which will provide that framework, or those principles that will really sort of drive the industry, code developers, and others to really achieving those goals.
What trends are you starting to see in relation to lower emission materials being used for buildings and infrastructure? I know you touched on it a little earlier, but could we just perhaps go back to that and look at some more of them?
So I think we're certainly seeing a lot of attention on concrete and steel, looking for opportunities to reduce the emissions, associated with those materials, which are, pretty significant, and significant material in the built environment. We're also now seeing a enhanced use of wood products. So just within the last few years, this concept of mass timber or tall timber buildings has grown. So typically, you would only see sort of wood structures in low-rise buildings, but now we're seeing sort of higher or taller buildings using wood, really as an opportunity, I think, one, to get back to some of the sort of natural materials, but really also recognizing the carbon sequestration that happens, with wood, really embodying, or sort of pulling the carbon from the atmosphere, and sort of using that for the long term in buildings. Um, So I think those are certainly some exciting areas. I think in general we're also seeing this look at just understanding the environmental and carbon impacts of the materials we use. And so this growth of uh, in- um, uh, uh, environmental product declarations, sort of being able to understand sort of what are the carbon impacts, and being able to sort of measure and talk effectively, and really understand sort of across the entire sort of suite of products or materials we use in our built environment, sort of what are the impacts of each of them, and that can really help us sort of make the choices that meet our performance and climate goals.
So, you have a background that includes environmental policy. What policies do you believe we will see to govern and regulate the changes required for climate mitigation in the future?
So I think we'll see a combination of regulation and incentives. I think we'll continue to see sort of changes within building codes, both on the energy efficiency side and on the materials side, to sort of enhance the performance and reduce the environmental impact of the materials we use. I mentioned the Securities and Exchange Commission, so sort of more reporting on sort of corporations and businesses and sort of what their impacts are. Um, but I also think we'll see a lot of incentives come up, really to help drive folks, for instance, transition to electric vehicles. I think we'll see sort of increased incentive programs, rebates, tax credits, even government investments in things like vehicle charging networks can be sort of a form of incentive. Um, and so I think between the combination of regulation and incentive, I think we can get there. I think sort of as I mentioned up front, um, the sort of social change or sort of need to drive towards these things, I think is going to be sort of the interesting challenge. Sort of who steps up to help drive the progress forward. I think another sort of important aspect, of the policy discussion, is again, sort of what I mentioned at the beginning of, sort of understanding how policies will impact vulnerable populations. And so it's thinking about some of the strategies that folks have talked about, sort of whether that's a carbon tax, or sort of providing limits on energy use and sort of trade-offs. And so thinking about sort of how do we leverage maybe the revenue, from a carbon tax to help support vulnerable populations, enhance their efficiency, supporting things like affordable housing, and assuring that they're, as efficient as possible. And so, really thinking across, sort of policy from a regulatory side, incentives, and then, sort of the impacts on, various elements of society.
So, when you think future, where do you see the built industry will gain the biggest wins in the net zero achievement?
Yeah, so I think recognizing that buildings are a significant portion of business expenses. They may not be sort of on the radar of folks in the C-suite, but being able to sort of highlight the important role of buildings, I think will help drive progress. Um, I think we'll see an increased use in zero energy buildings, which I think is really exciting. Um, I think that will, drive a couple different things. I mean, having, um, sort of the demonstration that these things are possible, that they are cost effective, is great. But I think it'll also inspire the next generation of folks to enter the industry, to really see the cool things and technologies that we can use to really achieve the goals that we have, as a society, as an economy, as a business, and really help us drive forward to meet the needs that frankly we need to meet to continue sort of as a as a civilization. So I think it's really important, and certainly um, commend VinZero for sort of having that conversation, and encouraging others to think about these sorts of things.
Absolutely. And look, we're incredibly proud to be working with ICC and the ANCR to spread the word. So I think there's a lot of important conversation that needs to be had, and this is definitely just the start of that. I mean, in closing, what would your advice be to the companies that are yet to engage fully in the change required? How do we inspire them to get moving?
Yeah, I think that's really an important question. A couple things. I think first, look to your customers. What are your customers expecting? What are your employees expecting? What is the sort of community that you serve expecting? And I think that will certainly help to drive the conversation. But also, look back at sort of what are your contributions or opportunities in this space. I think one sort of key thing that maybe doesn't get a lot of attention is, sort of addressing these climate issues, opens up a whole new sort of economy for, new jobs, new activities, new products to really help support these initiatives. So certainly an exciting time and no shortage of opportunities.
Ryan, it's been absolutely fantastic to have you on the program. I know we'll have you back again, and we'll be talking about how to think future with you again in the future very soon. Thank you very much.
Great. Appreciate it.
This podcast was brought to you by VinZero. VinZero help the AEC and manufacturing industries keep pace with digital change and achieve their technological and sustainability leadership goals. VinZero is a company that cares about creating and building a better world. Together, we are working with industry and environmental experts, providing forums and platforms through our VinZero Think community to create conversations that matter to our future generations. We invite you to join in the conversation and participate in our Think community. Like and subscribe to Think Future to stay up to date with the latest innovations and conversations as we take AEC and manufacturing around the world closer to zero. You can download our podcasts at vinzero.com or from your favourite podcast platform. From VinZero Think Future, thanks for listening.